Hi, good morning, everybody. I've never used this platform before, so I'm not sure we're all live, but uh, Yasmina, are we good to go here? I don't know if you can hear me. There you go.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Okay, we good?
yeah.
Okay. All right, well, I don't know if anybody wants to ask questions or stop me during this presentation. Raise your hand and I'll see if I can figure out how to respond. Um, So it's always kind of strange being in an environment where I can't see the audience. So, because typically when I make presentations, I like to make them as interactive as possible, and at least be able to get a sense of how my audience is reacting to what I'm saying. So it's always a little bit tricky. Kind of feel like I'm talking to a mirror. Which is always a scary thing to do, especially as you get older and older. And the mirror gets uglier and uglier as you go. But anyway, having said that, I was originally scheduled to talk today about something very different. So I hope you're here to see me or hear me talk about the movie Autism in Love and what has transpired in the 10 years or so since that movie was released. We can change that topic at the very last minute. So um, I hope you enjoy this, and I hope this is what you're wanting to hear. Um, so I'd like to start out by talking a little bit about the movie itself, since I don't know if any of you have seen the film. I know it did get quite a large reception, at least when I talk in autism circles, as I do. Often people will say, they've seen the film, and I often hear positive things, although that's because people don't like to say negative things to the person who created the film. So who knows? But if you saw it, I appreciate it, and I hope you liked it. It was presented actually at last year's Autism Summit, and so perhaps you saw it there, perhaps you saw it when it was on TV or Netflix. But if you did, again, thank you so much for watching it and spending an hour and 10 minutes of your life with something that I feel responsible for creating, for better or worse. The film itself, if you don't know, was a documentary, the origins of which kind of came about in the very office that I'm sitting in right now in Ojai, California, where I live, and where my home office is located. And I just want to briefly review some of the origins of the film so that you'll know a little bit about where it came from before we talk about where it's been and how things have changed or have happened in my life since then. So the film was conceptualized roughly about 2013, somewhere in that vicinity. And I had spent, by that time in most of my adult life, working with the autism population, children primarily. Although when you work in this field for a long time, the children you work with tend to grow up. And as they grow up, the concerns, as many of you know, will change from whether they can speak, whether they can get along with other people, whether, how functional they are. And as many of you know, one of the struggles that we have had in our field is a lot of misconceptions about what autism is. Not that we really know much now anyway, but what someone with autism can do and is capable of doing. And one of the ideas that had been prevalent in the field, as were many misconceptions at the time, but one of them that was particularly interesting to me was the general belief that people who were on the autism spectrum were incapable of having a loving relationship with another person. That, those of you who may be on the spectrum yourself, those of you who have children or know people who are on the spectrum will immediately have some difficulty with that concept. Although why that concept exists is pretty obvious to some extent. The idea, of course, is that by virtue of the very fact of how we understand intimacy between two people is, and loving relationships, is we get to know each other, we get to know what they're thinking, we get to know what's deeply in their soul, and what matters to them and how they view the world. And then we have warm, loving feelings towards that person. Well, the myth about autism, of course, was that by definition, people on the spectrum were incapable of loving. They were incapable of loving because they were incapable of understanding another person's point of view or were completely disinterested. So we would talk about in the old days, we talked about the primary deficit in autism being theory of mind, the difficulty understanding another person's perspective. And if you can't understand another person's perspective, well, then you couldn't have a real relationship with them. And so that was the view. And again, those of us who know people on the spectrum, those of us who are on the spectrum, those of us who, are parents, know that just isn't so. That in fact, our kids love and they love deeply, and they're very capable of love. But at the time, 10, 15 years ago, that just wasn't something that most people thought was true. And wanting to deal with those misconceptions, I started doing some research on people with autism, adults with autism, and how they dealt with relationships. And I designed some studies, and part of the studies that I did entailed recording interviews with people on the spectrum, talking about the romantic relationships that they were involved in or wanted to be involved in. And these interviews were pretty fascinating. They were pretty interesting. And there were some great stories in there. Well, being that I'm located in the Los Angeles area, and my career has pretty much been in this part of the world, you can't really avoid the entertainment industry and so you're always sort of interacting one way or another. And me as a psychologist, many of my clients have been in the industry. My sister's an actress, and it's been part of my life, pretty much forever. So, and I also had an assistant at the time who worked for me, who was an aspiring actress, which is, the cliche is that, what's that? I think it's a Burt Bacharach song. Do you know the way to San Jose? LA is a great big freeway. Put 100 down and buy a car. In a week, maybe two, they'll make you a star. So, you come to LA and become a star. Of course, that sort of doesn't happen that often, to say the least. But there's so many aspiring people in the industry who you meet around town. So it turns out that I was talking to my assistant, and I said to my assistant at the time, these interviews might make a great movie. Maybe we could do something with them. And she agreed, and I said, but you know what, I've never done a movie before. Never made a movie, not a professional movie before. And so we, in fact, then decided to explore that idea. I talked to a bunch of people, talked to some lawyers in the industry. Everybody said, you're crazy, don't do this. It's going to cost you a fortune. You'll never make any money on it. In fact, 99% of the films that are made, especially documentaries, are never make it out of the can, is the phrase they use. They never get to see the light of day. And so, that didn't stop me, because those things, if someone says you can't do something, that's one of the best motivations for doing it. So, I basically said, let's do this, to my assistant, and she kind of became my producer along with me. She had a friend who was a director, and I paid that director to make me what's called a sizzle reel. Sizzle reel is a short, give him the concept and say, here's the concept, what can you do with it? And it's about 4 minutes long. And it shows me how he thinks and that sort of thing. So anyway, we went ahead and did that, sizzle reel. I loved it. It became somewhat of not really, but it sort of became a selling point for the film. One always wants to get investors in these things, but people don't invest in documentaries unless they're out of their mind. And I couldn't find too many of those folks. We did some fundraising. We did make some money, but very little. So most of it was financed by me, but we did it on a shoestring budget. And we ended up making this documentary. This documentary originally followed 9 people for as long as we could, pretty much almost the course of a year. We chose those 9 people somewhat at random, just put out little sort of Craigslist notices and social media stuff, and by hook or crook, we were able to get some people who agreed to participate and let us film them for about a year. We ended up with essentially 5 of those 9 people, because a lot of what you film, as any of you who have made movies know, doesn't quite make it into the final cut. We had about 300 hours of film that we edited down eventually to about 70 minutes to make the movie Autism in Love. Then, of course, what you do is you try to get somebody to see the movie. And that's not easy. The traditional way is to show it at film festivals, and theoretically people come to these film festivals, and if they like something, they may show it on their network or their streaming service, to something to that effect. You have agents, if you can get an agent, and people like that who try to sell it to networks. We were able to get an agent, which is not an easy thing to do, for the film. And that agent was able to get the film to be accepted by a public broadcasting company in the US, and a particular TV show called Independent Lens, which highlights independent filmmakers and dealing with important topics. So Independent Lens bought the film to show on PBS, and it was shown on public television and did very, very well. You don't really know numbers on these things, but that was the first way that we were able to get it out to the public. And then subsequent to that, we were able to sell the film to Netflix, which buys the rights to show it for a limited period of time. And Netflix is a very unusual sort of structure. They won't, it's very secretive. They don't tell you how many people view the film, that you don't get ratings or any, you get ratings like subjective ratings that people who view the film will give to it. But, you know, Netflix bought it. Still, a combination of Independent Lens and Netflix, we still didn't make our money back that I had put into it, but we eventually got close. So we were able to get Autism in Love out into the public through Independent Lens, through Netflix. So that was that. Again, in summary, we ended up following the lives of essentially 5 different people, 4 of whom were on the spectrum, one of whom was the partner of someone who was. And we can talk a little bit more about that at some point. I don't know, again, no one has raised their hand or that I've seen, so, and I'm not sure how to manipulate this so that I'll be able to respond, but if it happens and if I see something on my screen, I will let you know. So that's sort of the first part. That takes us to the film getting out there into the world. That occurred about 9 years ago. So here we are, almost 10 years after that. I will mention that subsequent to that film coming out, you know, some very interesting things have occurred, and I wanted to sort of update you on that. As this film probably has reached pretty much the end of its life. It's not available on Netflix. It was only available on Netflix for 2 years. If you haven't seen the film, the only place I think you can still see it is from the website itself, which is simply Autism in Love, as one word, no spaces, autisminlove.com. And you could probably order it for under just a few dollars there. So something just happened to my screen. I don't know what that is. All right, so what's happened since? Well, as the film was shown during one of the festivals that it was shown at, as it was being released, this is really not about the film, but it's about me. I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer with kind of a 50-50 chance of surviving 5 years. It's now about 10 years later. What the cancer did was kind of knock me out for at least 2 years, where I could not function in any way. I was essentially on the couch or in a hospital getting treated. So I missed a lot of the festivals, but we did do well, and we were given Best Film at one of the festivals that we were at, audience awards and that sort of thing. So we had a pretty good festival run as well. But one of the nice consequences for me, and I believe this occurred before the cancer really hit, was that as a result of the Independent Lens TV appearance, we were nominated for Best documentary by the Emmys, and so I was able to attend the Emmys. So there's the Emmys in Hollywood, which are TV shows that are sort of general shows, and then there's the news and documentary Emmys, which is the same group of people, but those take place in New York. And so I was able to go to New York and attend the Emmys. We did not win that year, so didn't get to make a speech, but it was still really a fun event to attend. So that was kind of an exciting bit. Occasionally, when I talk to people about the film, they notice some similarities between the film and some things that were aired subsequent to it. And so I will talk to you a little bit about that. One of the things that we did after the film was released and after the film had its initial run was we had thought, this might make an interesting TV show. So what we did at that point was decided to pitch the movie as a TV show. Love, something akin to Love on the Spectrum. We called it something like that. And we pitched it. I wasn't personally involved in the pitch because, as you can see, if you're watching me now, I'm not a young guy. And if you know anything about Hollywood, as they say, or the entertainment industry, or as we say in California, the industry, you will know that it is an extremely ageist industry. And you don't get to talk to anybody if you're over 30-ish. And so the director of the film, Matt, who is well, he's not anymore, but he's in that 30-ish area, as well as the head of another production company who we thought could help us out. They went and pitched the film as a TV show concept, and basically went to every network, did their pitch, and it was turned down. They did it to around 10 different streaming services. And they were turned down one after the other for the show. Went to Netflix, turned down Netflix, even though they had shown the film. They were not interested in it as a TV show. There was an exception at the very end. You keep going, right? You keep failing until you stop. And that was MTV, of all places. So MTV actually bought it. Now, when I say bought it, these things, if you're interested in it, are called step deals. That's the language for it. Step deals means you get money based on where the show is in its cycle. And MTV bought the concept for the show, and then, but didn't give us any money. What they did instead was they allocated $60,000, none of which went to us, but went to themselves. They allocated $60,000 to enter the casting phase. The casting phase is who are going to be the who's going to be the cast members. That is a very, very important, as you can imagine, stage in developing something. If they got through the casting stage, the next stage might be production, at which point there might be some money coming to us, who knows. In the middle of casting, the head of MTV was fired. Because MTV was losing its audience. And when he was fired, the new boss turned out to be not the same as the old boss, as the old Who song goes. The new boss basically said, we, MTV, need to get back to our roots. And our roots are showing music videos. And we don't want this autism in love concept. So it just disappeared. So that was it. It was over. We had done everything we could do to get it on the air as a TV show. Lo and behold, one day on Netflix, we see the advertisement for this show that looked a whole lot like what we were pitching. And it was called Love on the Spectrum. It turns out Love on the Spectrum was originally created by an Australian production team, and essentially was the autism in love concept. That was a fascinating ripoff, and you know, you kind of wonder, right, if it was really a ripoff or if it was sort of somebody who had a similar idea and then just, you know, was able to sell it where we couldn't. But it turns out that it really was a ripoff, and the way we knew that was because in actuality, we did get an email that from this Australian production company that said, hi, you guys, we would like to do your movie as a TV show. Would you give us the okay to do that? At the time we got that, we were so wrapped up in our own stuff that we didn't respond. But we do have that email somewhere. But then the other thing that was so fascinating to me was, if you remember that sizzle reel, which was on YouTube for a while, may still be on YouTube for a while. If you remember, I mentioned the sizzle reel that the director used to show me what he could do. The Love on the Spectrum previews on Netflix were almost shot for shot, frame for frame, the same as the sizzle reel that Matt put together as the director of the film. It was different characters with the same exact shot, the same exact content, the same sequence. So it was clearly a concept that was taken directly from Autism and Love. Love on the Spectrum was very successful I believe, on Netflix. I don't know if it's actually still in production or not. I know that I think the Australian production company, I think, left the picture, and somehow an American production company took it over. And again, I don't know the details. I watched the show once for about 5 minutes, And, you know, I didn't, you can imagine with pouring one's heart and soul into this concept and doing the movie, it left sort of a bad taste for me. I hear it was a good show. I hear people really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad for that. But the whole thing kind of left a bad. And it's sort of like not. I don't really want to watch someone else's version of of the same movie that I did. I hope that doesn't sound too awkward, but or unkind. But yeah, that's just me. So another interesting piece, I think, was the relationship between you know, you have to recall that prior to Autism in Love, there really was very little. There was sort of nothing in this arena of popular TV shows having to do with anyone on the spectrum. There was maybe a little bits and pieces of that, but another element of this experience for me was a TV show that you may well be familiar with because it ran until very recently, when it was just canceled for 6 or 7 seasons, I think 6 seasons, a show called The Good Doctor. And one may say, well, what does The Good Doctor have with Autism in Love? And pretty much nothing, except for the fact that Freddie Highmore, in the lead role in The Good Doctor, you may or may not agree with me, but I have seen that TV show once, and I enjoyed it. And I thought Freddie Highmore did a great job, by the way. And being interested in how he came about to do a great job, knowing that he himself is not on the spectrum. And by the way, I've never met him. But I saw an interview article with him, which I have somewhere, you know, in which he was asked in the interview how he studied for the role of that Sean, I think, I can't remember the character's name, for the Good Doctor role. And he said in his interview, as I was reading it, that there was this great documentary that he watched over and over again called Autism in Love. And he studied the characters in Autism in Love. And that's how he practiced and studied for his role. So I felt very, very honored and complimented by that. And complimented, not that I was acted in it, but that, you know, it was something that that connected The Good Doctor to that show, to Autism in Love. The only other thing I really wanted to mention was that, sort of on a personal level, this was a big risk for me, not just financially, but it was a big risk for me because my name was associated with it. There are a lot of controversies, as you know, in this field, especially because I am a fan of applied behavior analysis, although I do accept the fact that ABA is not always done the best way, but I am definitely a fan of applied behavior analysis. And so and my name does get, I do a lot of speaking, my name does get out there in the public, so I am concerned a little bit about things like reputation and that sort of thing in the field. And so I was worried. One of the most worrisome moments I had was the film itself was shown, like it was shown here at the Autism Summit a year ago. It had a showing at many conferences throughout the country, but one was the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists. And I was invited to a panel discussion there. And prior to the panel discussion, the audience of psychiatrists watched the film, and the audience was about 300 psychiatrists. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever spoken to a group of psychiatrists, but it's kind of intimidating. They're not necessarily the friendliest audience, and they tend to be kind of critical of things. That's been my experience. So I was worried, and what I was worried about was that there are so many controversies about autism and about what does autism look like. And this idea that, oh, if this person, I will share with you that, for example, when I first started in the field back in, actually it was 1980, well, I started a little bit before that, but when my first sort of full-time job as a psychologist, my first clients were kids that had been diagnosed with autism and did very well. One of them was in a very unique treatment program in England by a woman named Rachel Pinney, who had written a book actually about this client, and it was a very intensive play therapy modality. And the other was a child who had been in Lovas's original study. So they had very different kinds of treatment. They both did very well. In fact, they both were considered cured, in quotes, because they were so high functioning after the treatment. And the psychiatrist who was the medical director at the clinic I worked at said to me one day, well, they were misdiagnosed. They couldn't have been, they couldn't have had autism. And I said, how come? And he said, because they got better. And so that one of the myths at the time was that people on the spectrum don't ever get better if they truly have autism. So again, so many myths, so many incorrect ideas. If you're high functioning, then you're not really autistic. If you're low functioning, you're incapable of change. There's all sorts of things out there that we struggle with in the field. So I really thought I was going to get excoriated by these psychiatrists. I really thought they were going to really give me a hard time because perhaps the people we chose were too high functioning. Perhaps they didn't meet all the criteria. But I got a very, very welcome reception, and they loved the film. So I felt very good about that piece of it too. So the last piece of this presentation, for those of you who have seen the film, you would be because I get this all the time, very interested in the characters in the film. And I just, before I end and go to questions, if there are any questions, I'll give you a little bit of information about the what we do know and don't know, mostly don't know about the people who volunteered to participate in the film. And for those of you who haven't seen it, this may not be too interesting, but for those of you who have, I think you'd appreciate knowing a little bit about some of the characters in the film. Many people who see the film really identify and feel close to some of the characters. And I say characters, but it's a documentary. None of this was scripted. None of it was rehearsed in any way. This was all just following their lives. You know, if you've seen the film, Stephen and Gita, and Stephen was, or is, I should say, kind of a very sort of Rain Man type presentation, who in many ways you might say was somewhat low functioning relatively, although was able to maintain work through the equivalent of, in California, what we call regional centers, and this was in the Midwest of the U.S. And I guess if it won't be too much of a I forget the word. If you haven't seen the film, you know, this is something that you probably will lose the surprise, but in the film, unfortunately, Gita, his wife, passes away in the middle of the film, also from cancer. And Stephen goes on living independently. He's still living independently. From what I understand, he's still doing quite well, and he still has his job with the post office, creating boxes and that sort of thing. But my understanding is that he's still living independently. He has two sisters who come by every once in a while to check up on him. Both of his parents, who we meet in the film, sadly, in the last 10 years, have passed away. One of the things that is never mentioned in the film at all, which is a decision that, you know, I don't know, and upon reflection, I struggle with whether it was the right thing or not to mention it, but it is both of Stephen's parents were concentration camp survivors, so that doesn't get revealed at all in the film, but they did pass away within the last 10 years. So so that's sad, certainly. But Stephen, as far as we know, is doing well. Lindsay and Dave, for those of you who know the film, you know that Lindsay and Dave ended up getting married. They're still together. And I will say that I was going to mention something a little bit about the importance of casting. There have been some concerns expressed about the film itself by Lindsay. And to respect her confidentiality, I really don't want to go into any kind of detailed level. But one of the consequences of using real people with real names and not actors is that they have reactions to the film, and being exposed to the general public can be quite problematic. And in fact, there was nothing about the film per se that Lindsay had trouble with, but there were concerns that were brought up, and I Again, I won't get into any detail level out of respect for her and her confidentiality around those things. But there have been some problems. My understanding, though, is that they too are doing well as far as I know. And in reality, we have had virtually little to no contact with either of them. Lenny is the person in the film that many of you who have seen the film expressed the most concern about. Lenny, in fact, probably was in the most psychic or emotional pain of any of the people in the film itself, which we see a lot of his struggles and a lot of his suffering around relationships in the film. We have been in touch quite a bit with Lenny's mother, who's very involved in the autism community, which is how we met him. And he has had, since the film, and during the film, actually, quite a few ups and downs. There were some downs that were pretty severe, not as a result of the film itself, but subsequent to the film. However, he's done better, and he continues to do better. And Lenny, in fact, is actually still working. So we covered Stephen and Gita, Lindsay and Dave, and Lenny, and I don't think I'm forgetting anybody else. I think that was it. I will mention one other thing before we stop and see if there's any questions at all. And that is this. There was when the film was originally edited, it was about an hour and a half long, and there was another character in the film. His first name is Howard, and when I originally saw what Matt, the director, had done, we all felt, and I said we all, it was Carolina, the co-producer, the producer, Matt, and me, that it was too long, that the hour and a half, which is these days pretty much an average film length, really didn't work. And we felt that Howard, who was a crossing guard, and who really had not entered any relationships himself, really didn't fit in the film. So we cut him out altogether. So the 70 minutes that were left became the film. But at one point, I had said to Matt, I'd like to just watch Howard without him being interspersed with the others. And I'd like to see everything spliced together, if you will, edited together, if you will, with just Howard. And we did that. He did that. And I thought that when we did that, it was a great film on Howard. And Howard was a guy who had been bullied quite a bit as a result of his autism when he was in school as a child. And eventually went back to his 20th, I think, high school reunion, and was welcomed back, and which, at the end of which, it was sort of, some of the people who knew him kind of apologized to him for how they behaved. And it was kind of a sweet, what we call an arc. It had a great story to it. So we ended up creating another short documentary called Becoming Howard, which we are now, almost 10 years later, distributing at some film festivals and seeing if we can get it to be seen. I believe it is being shown or has been shown at this conference. I'm not sure when and for certain if it has. But this was another result of the film. Now we also have, 280 hours of other things that I haven't even looked at. But Becoming Howard is actually was entered into a couple of film festivals and actually already won one. So for a documentary short. So we're excited about that. And I think it all owes to Matt, the director, and how good of a job that he does. So I think that's pretty much covers what I wanted to say. We have about 5 minutes left if there's anyone who has any questions. Here comes Yasmin.
Thank you so much. Now I will stop the broadcast. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.